One of my favorite classes to give as Pesach approaches is to review the 8 mitzvahs in the Torah that the Rambam lists as still applicable today. Forget the Korban Pesach. We can't do that. We don't have a Beis Hamikdash, and there's a number of mitzvahs that fall to the wayside because we don't have the Korban Pesach. But even without the Beis Hamikdash, the Rambam lists 8 mitzvahs that we still have today to do. And so the way I like to approach it is to ask the class, what are those 8 mitzvahs? Everybody's keeping Pesach, you should know what they are. And invariably, I always get two possibilities that are wrong. One is moror, that it's a mitzvah to eat moror, and that is wrong. Today it is no longer a mitzvah to eat moror Pesach night, because it was only together with the Korban Pesach that we were instructed to have moror, eat the Korban Pesach with matzah and moror, but without the Korban Pesach, the Torah never obligated us to eat the moror. The other one I get is the 4 cups of wine. People just seem to think that that is from the Torah, and it's not. It's from the rabbis. Now, it's important to know these things, because otherwise you're going to make a big mistake. We have a mitzvah of Bal Tosif. Do not add mitzvahs in the Torah. Now, when you do a mitzvah, you have to know what you're doing. So if, when you eat the moror Pesach night, you think you are performing a Torah command, since there was a Torah command to eat moror, but only with the Korban Pesach, to now say, I have another mitzvah to eat the moror without the Korban Pesach, you're adding to the Torah. And then you're doing an avir rather than doing something positive, you're doing something negative. You have to have intent, you have to know what you're doing. The whole thrust of halacha is to be careful, pay attention to the details of the halacha. And this is a major detail. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this because the Torah said to do, because Hashem taught us to do this? Or am I doing it because the rabbis instructed us to do that? That's a major detail. And with moror, you have to know you're doing it because the rabbis instructed you to commemorate the idea of moror, but not because the Torah. Otherwise, you probably are, transgressing a negative commandment in the Torah, Bal Tosi. With the 4 cups of wine, it may not be a transgression of Bal Tosi, because there is no mitzvah at all in the Torah to drink the wine. So the fact that you're drinking wine thinking that it's what Hashem wants, so you could fumble it. You could say that there's a lot of things Hashem wants, that it's not exactly the mitzvah. He wants me to be kind to my neighbor. How do I be kind? So I do this or do that. It's in the spirit of the thing. So you could make a case that no, it's still adding to the Torah. If you think you're drinking wine as a mitzvah in the Torah, you're adding a mitzvah to the Torah. But so in either case, you should know that they're both derabbanan. Keep that in mind, please, so that you do something positive, not negative. Now, let's review the 8 mitzvahs that the Rambam lists that we still have to do today. There's 3 positives in that list, and then 5 negatives. 2 positives have nothing to do with chametz. They are tell the story over on the first night, and eat matzah on the first night. The chametz comes in as a positive, destroy the chametz before Pesach arrives. The other 5 also apply to chametz. The first one, of course, is not to eat chametz on Pesach itself, and is punishable by kares if you do. So that's 4. The next 2, 5 and 6, go together. They're bal yirah and bal yamatzah, which means don't see chametz and don't find chametz. But those 2 mitzvahs really mean the same thing. Do not own chametz. Number 7 is don't eat a mixture of chametz, taruvis chametz. You're not allowed to eat a mixture. It's a separate mitzvah in the Torah to eat, not to eat a mixture of chametz. And number 8 is not to eat chametz erev Pesach. There's a separate mitzvah about not eating it from noon on, 6 hours before, but we start doing it earlier. Knowing these 8 mitzvahs and thinking about them can give us a great insight into the stringencies, so many stringencies, that the Jewish people have taken upon themselves over Pesach. One of the most prevalent is kitnias, beans and peas and other lentils, whatever they're called, rice. The Sephardic world doesn't have that stringency so much, but the Ashkenaz world has it big time, and it makes a big difference. Another one is gebroxt. I think that's mostly Hasidish, but not to eat not to allow matzah meal to be mixed with water, under the theory that there could be some flour still in there, and that would become chametz. And the third one is that some people don't eat chickens at all during Pesach because chickens eat grains, and if you shech the chicken on Pesach, you can open up and find the grain, and it'll moist, and it'll become chametz, or it's already become chametz possibly. So those are the 3 stringencies. It makes a very big difference, and there's all kinds of personal stringencies that people have in terms of cleaning and the way they do it, and so on. And a lot of people look on this and think that they're going way too overboard. It's not necessary, and I'm not going to do that. And they look down on those other people. And the people that are doing it, maybe they feel overly taxed when they're doing it. I mean, they do it, but they kind of resent it. And other people just do as much as they can. What's the proper attitude with all these things? I'm going to show you how really these stringencies can result in you performing a very high level mitzvah in the Torah, a deraisa mitzvah. Go back to the 8 mitzvahs. Of the 8, 6 relate to chametz. Burn the chametz even before Pesach starts. Don't eat chametz as punishable by karis, so very severe. There's only 2 other foodstuffs that are punishable by karis. That's blood and the fat of a kosher animal. And they're always forbid. Chametz you can eat normally, and yet on these 7 days from the Torah, it's punishable by karis. Very stringent. Then, not to own chametz. Now, there's 2 mitzvahs of the exact same nature, saying the exact same thing. That's the only instance in the Torah of such a thing. We have many ideas in the Torah that are covered by 2 mitzvahs, but one is a positive, one is a negative. So at least they have sort of a different power. Like Shabbos, rest on Shabbos, meaning don't do any labor. They result in the same thing, but one's a positive, one's a negative, so they have a different power. But here you have 2 negatives saying exactly the same thing. Now we have many mitzvahs in the Torah where there are more than one verse telling us the same thing. We don't count each verse as a separate mitzvah. We just count the one mitzvah because the instruction is the same in each of the verses. So why do we count 2 of the 613 under Bal Yiro, Bal Yimotze? It's very overboard. Also, we don't need a separate mitzvah not to eat a mixture of pig meat or any other treif food. If it's treif, if it's chazer, or treif another other way, you're not allowed to eat it, whether you mix it with something kosher or not. So why do we have a special mitzvah not to eat the mixture of chametz? And finally, eating chametz erev Pesach, that could have been rolled into the regular mitzvah of not eating chametz. It could have started earlier, and the fact that the punishment or the penalty for eating earlier is less than the penalty for eating after Pesach starts. Okay, that could have been all part of the same mitzvah. So what do you see from all this is that the Rebbeinu Shalom, Hashem went crazy, so to speak, about chametz on Pesach. He went way overboard. He peppered us with all kinds of mitzvahs that weren't really necessary, not really the normal style, in order to make an impression on us, or just to be intense about it. So we have a mitzvah in the Torah to walk in God's ways, to be like God. So if we see God going overboard on a certain issue, and we want to behave like God, so we go overboard ourselves, we take on all kinds of unnecessary, unusual stringencies, and we're behaving like God in this way, then we can say that the performance of those stringencies is actually an accomplishment of the mitzvah, li dameis bedrachav, to be like God, to walk in His ways. That's a very high level mitzvah. And so it's a much better way of looking at all these stringencies over Pesach. This in turn can make us think about the whole idea of lidamis bedrachav, of being like God, that Hashem is setting us up to acquire certain characteristics that are His very own, that to give us the power, not the same power as Hashem, obviously that's ridiculous, but to make us powerful in our own way through these exercises, these training exercises of the mitzvahs, that we may not realize how they're going to be useful to us in new situations that we rise in our life, or maybe even in the next life, which is going to be a wonderful thing. And we're acquiring the powers of how to be dynamic in the world to come. It's going to be fantastic. That requires a lot more thought. Chag kosher v'sameach.